All right, welcome back. So we had talked about the last thing was that you need to go through the columns and figure out what the missing values are. The next thing that you should do, and this is all related to figuring out what's going on in the metadata columns. And the metadata columns all text information. And so in order for us to work with this text information, we already had an entire lesson on string functions and the stringer package, but we're going to go back through and just give a quick review of this. So in the metadata, what I can do is I can pull out the label column and then detect which columns have the word Hispanic in it. Let's say, for instance, I'm interested in learning about what data I have available for Hispanic populations. If I'm interested in something else, then I would search for something else. And I say, okay, well, there's 24 columns that are related to that have the word Hispanic in it. So what we can do then is we can say, all right, well, I want to find out what those columns are. And so that means that I'm going to take my metadata and then I'm going to add on, so this is the mutate command, I'm going to add on a logical indicator to show whether or not that column had the word Hispanic in it. And so this is going to be a string detection command, so str detect, and it's going to return true or false. And then I'm going to filter to the records where this is true. And then I'm going to get rid of that logical indicator. So you see the minus sign. So I'm getting rid of that logical indicator column. And so these are the 24 columns of my original data. There are 24 rows here, but the 24 rows correspond to the 24 columns of the original data. Um, and so I can say like, okay, well, so I've got values for estimates, total, and then margin of error, total, and then race and Hispanic or Latino origin. Like I've got all sorts of information here. And what I would do is I would go through each one of these and I would read what it is that I'm interested in. But I would say that so you can here are some exercises then. So I explained the code above, but is this the best way to do this? Okay. And think about how you would document functions and why that would be important for this. And then what about, like, we see capital H Hispanic, um, but what about capital, like all caps Hispanic or lowercase Hispanic? What would we do there? How would we detect those things? And then some of these right here, like I don't know that I need estimate and margin of error. So maybe a lot of these columns aren't very useful to us at all. Okay. So what about, could we come up with a pipeline, combination of mutate and stringer commands that would get rid of the other columns that we don't need so that we have less things to sift through? So that's your first exercise. So take a minute and work on those. Okay, so you had some time to work on those exercises, and one of the things was that one of the exercises was uh, talking about why Hispanic with sentence case and Hispanic with this all caps are not the same. So we remember that there's the string to upper and string to lower functions that will help us in this case. So as soon as we apply this, so we say, okay, let's take our metadata information and we're going to change the label and we're going to take everything down to lowercase and then save it as a new data set. And now when we try to detect Hispanic, suddenly we don't have just 24 records. We've got 108 records. These are 108 of our 460 or 458 columns or whatever that we could be looking at that have information about measurements about Hispanic people or measurements about Hispanic households. Okay, so here is an important thing, and I've talked about this before. This is very, very important. I did not overwrite the original data set. I saved it as a second data set. When you are working with string data, please do not overwrite your original data set because there are so many ways for string manipulation to go off the rails, to get weird, to go wrong, to do things that you didn't expect it to do. So make sure that you have it, you still have the original data set in your global environment that you can back up a couple of steps if you needed to. Okay, so it's important to save, especially with string manipulation, to save those intermediary steps, because there are times where you'll keep going, be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I made this mistake. And I don't want to have to start all the way back over, but I can go back to this step right here and just start over from this object and then keep working. So just thinking there. And then I'll have like when I'm working with string manipulation, sometimes I'll have even like a dozen or 2 dozen steps in the middle until I get to something that I'm really, really confident about. And then I'll use the RM command to clean up those intermediary steps, but I absolutely keep them in the code so that I can go back to them and keep record of what I did if necessary. And then I'll just clean up my global environment later. So just be aware of that. This is a lot of times you want to make sure that you keep your global environment tidy, and so you don't want to create too many intermediary steps. But string manipulation is one of those instances where the intermediary steps are going to help you a lot, or saving the intermediary steps are going to help you a lot. Okay, so we've got these 108 columns that we potentially care about. And so I know that I really don't care about margin of error, especially if I'm the only thing I'm interested in is just counts for the counties or for the zip codes. So then I would say, okay, well, I'm going to add on a new column that says that's an indicator whether or not there's margin of error, whether or not this thing is measuring margin of error. And so I'm going to use my string detect function to find out whether or not margin of error is what this column is measuring. And then I want to say, give me the rows where this isn't true. So I want to get rid of all of the columns with margin of error. And now all of a sudden, hey, take a look at this. I started with about 460. Now we're down to about 230. So I got rid of basically half of the rows here of this metadata because I know I don't care about that anyway. Okay, now for some more exercises. There's a lot of extra superfluous information in here. So think about ways so these are 2 exercises here, all about cleaning up this string, the information in this string column. Is it a case where you might want to break this up into multiple columns? Is this a case where you want to remove some of these words that they just show up all the time and it's not helpful to you? Like how is there a better way for us to display this information so that we could search through and filter through and get a better understanding of what's going on in these 228 columns of meta information? Because the more that we understand about the meta information, that means that we're going to be able to ask better questions about the original data. So this is part of your preparation where you're saying, okay, I want to make sure that I'm understanding what's going on in the data, what's being measured. And then once I know what's being measured, then I can go into the original data set with the 1,000 records and I can choose the columns that are going to help me understand what I'm interested in the best way. Now, each of you, whenever you're working in your groups, you're going to find different things that you care about. Some of you are going to say, well, I want to look at Hispanic food stamp uses. Other you're going to say, well, I want to look at maybe there's data about single moms, or maybe there's data about multi-generational families. Maybe there's, oh, who knows? There's 228 different people. There's people with married couple families. There's like all sorts of things and all different ways that you could look at this data. And there's a bunch of ways to do it. So spend some time going through this data. See if you can clean up this metadata so that it's easier to wrap your head around what's going on in there. So I'm going to pause and give you some time to work on that. Okay, so you've had a few minutes to work on the meta information, and at this point, you should have a better idea of what's actually being measured in this data set. So now that you've wrapped your head around the data set and you got a decent idea of a decent understanding of what's going on in it, we want to do something called sanity checks. So I'm going to just give an overview of the purpose of sanity checks, and then we're going to end this video and we'll pick back up in the next video. But for now, just think about sanity checks as if you're working with a data set and you know, for instance, that you're working with, I don't know, what's a good example that I can think of? You're working with like dog pedigrees, and you know that Chihuahuas are small and Great Danes are big. So Chihuahuas, very small dogs, Great Danes, huge dogs, right? and you're doing all of this wrangling and cleaning, then one of the things that you might do is like, okay, I'm going to check the average weight of all of the Chihuahuas in my data set and the average weight of all of my Great Danes in my data set and make sure that the Great Danes are big and the Chihuahuas are small. And if I see that in my version of the data set that Chihuahuas are big and Great Danes are small, then I know that I made a bunch of mistakes, or at least one major mistake above me in the code. Okay. So the sanity checks are like, all right, once you've spent some time cleaning and wrangling your data, you start answering a question that you already know the answer to. So you say, I already know that this is true. I'm going to make sure that I can see this in my data set. If I already know that when I drop a rock, it falls to the ground, but if for whatever reason in this particular computing environment, I drop a rock and it floats to the ceiling, I know there's something terribly wrong with my computing environment. Okay. So the sanity check is you take something you already know and you measure it and confirm that it's true in your data. And if it's not true in your data, it's probably not because you have had like a groundbreaking experiment. It's probably that you screwed up something in your data cleaning, your data manipulation, and your data wrangling. So that's what these sanity checks are all about. The sanity checks are like stuff that it's not about what you're studying. You're just saying, okay, look, I know that this is going to be true all the time. I know that on average, men are taller than women. I know that on average, Great Danes are bigger than Chihuahuas. I know that on average, men don't get breast cancer, women don't get prostate cancer, stuff like that, where it's like if you're doing your data analysis and you have more men with breast cancer and more women with prostate cancer, then you know that there's something screwed up in your data. And it always has to be something that you know to be true ahead of time so that you can, and that's why it's called a sanity check. Like, are you going crazy? Um, so that's what you should do. Once you're done wrangling your data, cleaning up your data, you should absolutely perform some sanity checks to make sure that your data are measuring what you think that your data are measuring. And this is before you start asking and answering the question that you actually care about. Okay, you should make sure that your data is of good quality and that your wrangling and cleaning steps are correct first. Okay, so we will pick back up next time with what like an example of a sanity check. Um, and this will be sort of our example of the full dplyr workflow of working through this data. So we'll see you next time. All right.